Francis Bacon, if someone set out, as we're doing, to make a film about you and your work, what's the first thing you would want them to avoid trying to do?
Well, ask me to explain my painting, because as it's something that comes from the unconscious, it would be as ridiculous for me to try and explain my painting as to try to explain the unconscious. About portraiture, you see the person before you, and in my case I don't have people here. I only know that when I'm painting them, or very rarely, there are people that I know very well and know the contours of their face and know them as people very intimately. But how can I bring back this image of life onto the nervous system outside illustration? Because illustration, I know, won't do it. So therefore, I'm driven into arbitrary things, such as hoping that accident will give me forms that will bring back, take for instance the way the jaw goes, that is completely arbitrary, but yet makes the reality of this image, at least for me, because I can only judge by my own sensibility, brings back this irrational form, will bring back the appearance more violently than any illustration can do. And when I say violence, I mean that it gives the violence of life itself rather than an illustration of appearance.
Some people have taken exception to your paintings while being impressed by them on the grounds that they were over-violent.
Well, it always surprises me that people should think this way, because I have tried to be as realistic in my way as I can be. After all, you only have to think about life, or have experienced it in any way, or think about the meat on your plate, to think how disturbing what is called reality is. And everybody lives their life screened from it. And if my pictures seem to give over a kind of sense of violence or mortality, it's only in my attempt to be as realistic as I can. Mind you, when you talk about realism, I can only paint for myself. I don't paint for anybody else but for myself, because you can't. You try to bring the thing back onto your own nervous system in its most poignant form.
There is a great series of paintings which has been current in your work for years and years of the crucifix. And there is another series of paintings that you made, especially during the 50s, to do with the image of the Pope. They don't have any particularly religious significance.
None whatsoever. I was particularly obsessed by Velázquez's painting of the Pope, and I was at the same time very interested by Eisenstein's photograph in Potemkin of the nurse. And I made a combination, which I think has been very unsuccessful, of the Pope screaming in the way that the nurse. Now, the scream was not to do with expressionism, because I'm not expressionistic. I have nothing to express. I was absorbed by the idea of the colour of the mouth, the teeth, the saliva, you may say the beautiful red and purples of the interior, rather of the mouth, rather like Monet was obsessed by haystacks and the light falling on them from hour to hour. I don't know whether it's aesthetic or whether is an obsession by colour and saliva and the mouth opening and the teeth. I don't know whether that's aesthetic or not. I happened to buy, when I started to try and paint, I bought a book on diseases of the mouth in France, with beautiful colour illustrations, and they always obsessed me very much. It's gone now, all that, but it was very much at the time, it was very much in my mind at the time that I did these particular paintings.
You once described something as a very beautiful wound. And beautiful and wound are two words that most people wouldn't put together. Can you explain what you're getting at?
Well, very easily, because if you look at a wound, after all, the degrees of the wound, it can be bright red, it can be purple, it can have the beautiful colours of pus, it can be like a marvellous Monet landscape.
Most people would say, if I can take most people's part for a moment, impertinently, that there are affective qualities in wounds that remove aesthetic considerations like that.
Certainly. And if you're concerned with the person who has been wounded, you probably wouldn't look at it in that way at all. But if you're unconcerned with the person who is wounded, you would look at the wound, and you would see the marvellous colours that wounds produce. And with the crucifixion, it was not the crucifixion beyond the fact that a great many of the artists that I like best have made marvellous images of the crucifixion, but I use the crucifixion as an armature. For one reason, that the figure of Christ is raised off the ground, so that in a way the subsidiary figures were like attendants around this image of Christ. It was not done from a religious point of view. It was really done entirely from a structural point of view. Now I have found other ways of altering and making different elevations for the body. After all, images, one tries to make images, and if one thinks of the great images of the past, they are rubbing stones. Images are created from passions, and these passions are rubbing stones against which people, like they used for cattle, by which they relieved themselves, so that these images are things which deepen their awareness of life and even bring back life more vividly to them. Because if you see some of the very great art of the past, one comes away from it, no matter how so-called tragic it is, thrown back into life more violently.
a lot of your work has drawn a good deal of, inspiration from the photographs of Muybridge and Murray.
More from Muybridge than Murray, although I think Murray did, you could say, more beautiful images, but not so important from my point of view, because they both concentrated on movement of the body, but I find that Muybridge is more stimulating. You may say Muybridge are just raw statements of movements. You know, he had 9 cameras in different positions taking the movements of the body, and I find them, perhaps the Murray more beautiful, but the Muybridge more stimulating.
Are you interested in these dispositions of the body because they express something, or simply because they illustrate very clearly what the body does in particular situations?
Well, 2 things, both. One is that they are the alteration of the muscular structure of the body, but then every movement of the body has another intimation, because every way that a person moves, stands, moves their arms or anything else has not only its movement, but, you may say, all the implications of that movement as well. That is why it is terribly complicated thing to convey movement. Movement isn't so difficult, but the implications of movement, because every movement has another implication.
And every stage in the movement, you mean?
Yes, because it has its, you may say, its psychic implication. Its implication which is unconscious, but that movement signifies every movement of the body, every movement of every muscle signifies another way of reading what a person is saying or doing.
Is it fair then to say that when you attempt a portrait, you're trying to paint someone in as many characteristic dispositions as he or she is capable of, and somehow summarize the implications of those movements at the same time?
I would like to, but it's an almost impossible task. And it was what I would like to do, but there you are. Because I don't want to make... Futurism didn't do it. I don't think, or much as I admire Duchamp, that the figure descending the staircase is more than movement of an image. It's a marvelous image to have made of a figure descending the staircase, but yet so much is left unsaid. Because if you watch somebody descend a staircase, there is every type of implication in the movement of it. I admire certain artists today. I don't, but then that is a very local thing because time hasn't washed them through. But where do I go back? I go back to some of the very great expressionists. I think it takes quite a long time. I think it takes about 100 years or more before time begins or everything is washed away by the sea of time. There's very little that floats. And one begins to believe now that some of the expressionists are, and Cézanne, and Seurat, are resisting the pressure of time and are beginning to float like great images. If you take the great prehistoric images, of course, take the things in the north of Spain, I can't remember where, of the people chasing either game, one doesn't know whether they were chasing game or it was a battle. But you take these archers, which has been the greatest draftsmanship that has probably ever been made, and it's never been superseded, of the movement of these people, just with lines. It was a marvelous shorthand of movement. which has never been superseded. When you get to the Dordogne and those things, they'd already become decorations. You know, Lascaux and all that sort of thing. It was all so boring, actually, that it looked like Art Nouveau almost. It had lost all its vitality by that time, or in that region for some reason. There's a marvellous one in Spain of a figure up at a beehive taking out the honey, and you see this long ladder and the figure standing at the top of the ladder, and the bees the size of birds all round this. But it's a great image. Not an image that you could do now, because l'art brut, as they call, is ridiculous now, because it looks only like doodling on the walls of the Ritz today, because so much has gone in between that. Why? A man of today who has seen all that thing of the past cannot go back to that kind of art brut. So he has to go back to what is called an immediacy of art in a totally different way. He has to really work on himself to go back and to be able to make these images of immediacy. I call them, I know I drift in my conversation between the expression violence, but I think that and immediacy. I think immediacy is a better one than violence, because violence has all sorts of implications which immediacy doesn't give, because immediacy is just about the immediate object there before you. But then you must never forget that every object has its passions. It has its implications, no matter who they are. If I could record you 5 people in this room, how could I do it? I could illustrate you, and what good would that be? But how can I make the immediacy and the different suggestion by your very contours, by the difference in your faces, by the difference in your shapes? How can I make those things with, you may say, I have to use the word violence that you have here, within the studio, in this enclosed space. 5 living people. How could I make this thing? I could illustrate it, and that would say nothing. But how can I find, will accident work for me so that I can record you? Irrationally.
Why do you want to record us?
Because after all, life, we have the short moment of existence.
It's a way of making it permanent, in other words.
It's a way, as they talk about Proust, of crystallizing time and of crystallizing the moment of one's existence, and that's all one has. Why one wants to do this, you may say, is a mystery. Because we shan't ever know whether we've done it, and perhaps it's a way of passing the time. I couldn't go on if I was satisfied. Supposing I was satisfied with what I did. How can you be satisfied? Because everything escapes you. You know that perfectly well. You know, even if you're in love with somebody, everything escapes you. You would want to be nearer that person. How can you cut your flesh open and join it with the other person? It's an impossibility to do. So it is with art. It is almost like a long affair with objects and images, and it's almost like a love affair with images and appearances and sensations and what you can call the passions. It's very much like that. You may love somebody very much, but how near can you get to them? You're still always, unfortunately, sort of strangers.